Good morning, good morning. Are we about ready to begin? Okay. I'm on Irish time though. Okay. The title of the talk is The Little Non-Denominational Church. And our patron saints for this talk is Joachim and Anne, and they were the parents of Mary. And we call them in today to be with us this morning because they made a tremendous contribution, Joachim and Anne, because they produced Mary. And in doing so, the great gift that they gave to Mary was the fact that they made her very, very Jewish. She was very much imbued with the spirit of the Old Testament, the promises that were made to Abraham, our father in faith. She knew all about Moses. She knew all about the Torah. And she knew all about the Jews being the chosen people. To be Jewish, definition of a Jew is one who parts the womb of a Jewish mother. And so being Jewish, they're very conscious of the fact that they're part of the chosen people. They still are the chosen people today, the Jewish people. Because God made that covenant with Abraham and Moses. And they very important. What Joachim and Anne gave us Mary. And in my opinion, the Jews had basically three responsibilities. One was to prepare the world for monotheism, which is that there's only one God, Yahweh. And the second thing to do was to prepare the world for the coming of the Messiah. And the third was to produce Mary. And so, in my opinion, the Jews did a tremendous job in doing all of those things. And so with Joachim and Anne, we approach our little talk this morning and ask the Lord to be with us, to help us understand what His will for us is as we live our lives in following Him. But especially to the consciousness that we're part of a chosen people too, that He's called us to be Catholic. He's called us to be a part of a people, to bond together. And in spite of all of our limitations, that's His call for us. So we ask the Lord to be with us in this little talk through Christ our Lord. Amen. So what I've chosen this morning was to look at the Acts of the Apostles, and which is written by Luke, and it gives us a beautiful insight into the early church. And in chapter 2, it says, describing the early church, they devoted themselves to the apostles' instruction, to the communal life, to the breaking of bread and prayers. That summarizes the early church and how they bonded together and how they were with each other. And there's tremendous power in that they were very conscious of who they were. In the early church, they had consciousness of, they had responsibility to be proclaimers of the word, to be evangelizers. And you look at the apostles. They went all over the whole wide known world at that time to spread the gospel message. The Acts of the Apostles gives us a great description of of Paul and his missionary journeys, the 4 journeys that he went on. And Paul was always on the move. Paul never spent more than 2 years in any place. And he'd move on. And when he would move, he'd leave somebody behind him that could always keep the community together. And with Thomas, went all the way to India, was martyred there. Peter made his way to Rome. He too was martyred there. So the apostles spread all over the world. Another great quality they had was their steadfastness. They would rather die than to deny the Lord. And in the first 3 centuries of the church, many of them were martyred for their faith because the Roman Emperor believed that he was divine. Christians couldn't accept that. And because they couldn't accept the fact that the emperor was divine, the emperor got mad and he wiped a lot of them out. And another point was the great devotion to the Eucharist, how the Eucharist kind of molded them together, brought them together. So there were qualities of the early church, and they were very conscious that they were called to be one. And they had these sacred signs and symbols. One was the fish. If you came across somebody that you weren't sure that they were Christian, you would draw a fish on the ground like that. And if the person nodded their head, you knew they were Christian because the words for the Greek 2 letters for Christ and fish were the same. But that was the way that they communicated their great love for each other. And the great problem, I think, that we have today is the fact that we don't have that same consciousness that we're called to be a community, that we're called to be united with each other. So we're going to be concentrating on that this morning. So their unity among each other. We need to start looking at our homes. Our homes, Catholic. Does the mailman know that you're Catholic by the mail that you get? Oh yeah? How about Catholic movies? Have you seen one recently? Oh yeah? Tell me about it. So, there's a lot of, one of the things that as a priest, that as a pastor you get invited to go to homes for meals. And when I go there, a lot of times kids will invite me, come see my room. And when you go into a kid's room, it's very revealing because you know immediately where that kid is, who their heroes and their heroines are. Just look at the walls around. You see Spider-Man, Harry Potter, and all of these. They're their heroes and their heroines. But the question is, do they know that Jesus is their brother? Do they know that Mary is their mother? It's... Now, I know that a few of my parishioners said, my God, Father Mike has come and get a statue, put it into the kids' room. Yeah. That's moving furniture around, It's just a consciousness of, where the kids are and what we give to them. How much time are we conscious of the fact how much time our kids spend on the internet? Texting one another. I'm not saying that this shouldn't be done, but you know. There should be some control over it, you know. Vacations that we take, are they the same as everybody else in our neighborhood? We're very conscious of the fact we need to get our kids to Disney World. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Disney World. In fact, I brought my niece and nephew there one time. I made a commitment to them when I had a brother died in Ireland and he left 2 young kids. And so after the funeral, I said to them, next year, I'm going to bring it to the US and we're going to go to Disney World. And we did. But how about bringing our kids to an ordination? Have your kids ever seen an ordination? You know, how about a marriage? Have they seen that? You know, how about baptism? Have they seen that? How do we pick sponsors for our kids? Well, it's Auntie Gracie's turn this time, so we have to pick her. Now, she never goes to church and she could care less about her religion. Is that the person we should pick to be a guide for our child, raising in them in the faith? Because a sponsor, that's what a sponsor takes on, a responsibility. I'm going to share my faith with this child. I'm going to ensure, and it's not just a backup for if the parents anything happens to them. You know, it's not an honorary, it's a responsibility. See, there are a lot of things about us that we really, when I say Catholic, I mean, it's this bonding. I'm not talking about doing Catholic things. I'm not talking about the same. That's an expression of our faith, saying the rosary, doing the Stations of the Cross, assisting at Mass. That's the liturgy we're following. But how do we bond together as the people? How do we show that we're one? You know, that's, I think, very important, and we need to have a sensitivity to it. Are we married? Are we matrimonied? Anybody can get married, but to be matrimonied, it brings in the church, brings in the faith community. How important was it to you to marry a Catholic? You know, these are things that we need to look at. Do we take secular norms for our marriages? You know, the fact that the way we live our marriage is the same as everybody else in the community. It's not that these things are bad, but we should have a deeper way of living our life. Compliments. Do I compliment my spouse, or do I criticize? See, anytime I criticize, criticism can be very destructive. Because when I criticize you, for example, I'm standing outside our relationship. I'm telling you, straighten up and fly right, or I won't have anything to do with you. I really have no right to do that. And especially as a spouse, I have no right to criticize you. I'm supposed to be the only one in the face of this earth can see a wart on your nose and say, that's a beauty spot. Really. That's what, you know, or how do we, it's more of an attitude. How do we approach things, and how do we become and be a bonding for each other? What about the number of our children? Who decides that? Is it the same as everybody in the neighborhood? To have a child is unwanted, I don't care if you have 10 or 1, if your child feels unwanted, it should never be. Or the teacher, they're having a meeting this week, and the kids are going to be home, and oh my God, what am I going to do? The kids feel unwanted. That shouldn't be. Every moment we spend with our kids should be very precious. The meals that we share. And this is very, very important to me. As a priest, I try to teach kids about what the Eucharist is. Now, if they don't have an experience of a real meal, it's hard for them to understand the Eucharist. And a lot of times, it's society in which we live, we're very much influenced by it. A lot of our meals are put together on the basis of speed. What's the quickest way to share a meal? To me, a dinner should take at least 45 minutes. And it's that we have time to not just digest the food, but to talk to each other. Now, one of the blessings I've had as a priest is that I worked in the Chancery Office for 20 years. But every day at lunch, we went to St. Peter's at noon, at 12:30. And the bishop invariably would be there, but there were 4 or 5 priests there, and we'd share a meal together. But a minimum of time it took was 45 minutes. It's not that, that I was gaining weight I was pumping food in for the 45. No, it's that you have time to talk and share with each other. What do we talk about? Talk about everything else the same in the community. No, see, it's coming across with a different value system. It's the value system that you're imparting as well. It's not, that you're gossiping about your neighbor or something. There's a value system that you're imparting every time you open your mouth. So be conscious of that, because it's vitally important. See, I don't have any of the answers. I don't. I just have questions. That's what I have. I'm not married, so... Our children, are they going to grow up and know who they are? Are they going to know their faith? One of the... I shared with yesterday, I preached yesterday evening, I don't know if it was a group or a small group discussion, but my grandfather, every night, it's my mother's father, for his night prayer, he would go outside the door and he would stand for 10 minutes. And he would bless the sun, he would bless the moon, he'd bless the stars, he'd bless the birds, he'd bless the fish in the sea. He'd just keep on blessing everything. Now, as a young kid, 4 or 5, that made a tremendous impression on me. Because it didn't matter if it was, every day is raining in Ireland, and in fact it rains between showers. And he'd stand there, even in the rain. That made an impression on me as a young kid. And what he was doing is he's imparting a faith to me too. What's important to him in life. So, do you pray with your kids? I've mentioned this before. Are they part of your prayer life? Do you invite them to be part of your prayer life? And because the sacrament of the home has got to be the sacrament of matrimony. We've got to do adult things around the home. If your home were bugged, would there be enough evidence to prove that you're Catholic? Think about it. And it's mostly an attitudinal thing. It's just, we've got to be very sensitive to, we're part of God's people. He's brought us together, and we have a responsibility to impart that to our children. Because that's what it means to be Catholic, to belong, and to do that in a deep way. So the question that I have then, if you'd, for you all to reflect on after the break, is in what specific ways am I being non-denominational in my home and personal relationships. Wow, that's a knockout, isn't it? Okay. In what ways am I being non-denominational in that I'm not bonding, I'm not living with a consciousness that I'm part of a faith community? Even just the meal. I mean, I think a lot of homes that they have 2 meals a year, real meals in the strict sense of the word. Thanksgiving and Christmas. Everything else is speed and efficiency, And, that's why I don't particularly like fast food places. I have a hang-up about them. Or the drive-through window. So it's just feeding at the trough. Does that make sense? I'm just popping food in, but I've lost the sensitivity that I need to be talking with you. I need to be sharing with you. I need to know who you are. I need to know how you feel about God, how you feel. Are you afraid of Him? Are you afraid to die? I had a heart attack in 2002, and I diagnosed myself. I played racquetball, and after I played racquetball, I went into the steam room and I spent 15 minutes there. And I came out and I was feeling woozy. And I said, it's really not a good sign to be feeling woozy. Maybe I spent too much time in the steam room. And then I felt nauseated, and I said, oh God, this is not good. And I said I could be having a heart attack. And so I said, I'll give it 5 minutes. So I sat there, and I was buck naked. And I said, if I sound the alarm, they won't let me into. I'm all sweat. They won't let me into an emergency room. They'll have to hose me down first. So I'll take 5 minutes to see how it goes. And if it goes, fine. If it doesn't, I'll sound the alarm. So after 5 minutes, I felt okay, and I took a shower. Felt okay, and I got dressed. I went back to the office, and next thing the pain started again. I said, I'm having a heart attack. So I called the CFO upstairs and said, I'm having a heart attack. He said, I'll be right down. So we headed for the St. Dominic's emergency room, and we were about 100 yards from it. And he said, I have aspirins in the glove compartment. And he said, do you want some? And I said, no, we're just nearly there now. So when you go into an emergency room, the first thing is triage and everything else. And I was beginning to spiral down, and I knew it. So I went flying past that. And I got in the emergency room. I put my arms on I was going down. I knew it. I said to the nurse, I'm having a heart attack. And she looked at me as if I was off my tree. And she picked up the phone, and there was a doctor standing beside me. And he said, come with me. So he brought me in the emergency room, took my blood pressure. It was 60/40. And he hit the button for a code blue. And all of a sudden, there were 4 nurses on top of me. There was one popping, nitro under my tongue. Another one was popping aspirin, suck these down. Another one was getting an IV into me. Another one was taking my blood pressure. They were all over me. And I knew that a third of people die in their first heart attack. I knew there was a good possibility, I'm going to snuff it. But it really didn't bother me. I felt okay about it. I said, I might as well go now, because if I wait later, I'm going to have a hell of a lot more to answer for. So, anyway, let's take a break for maybe 10 minutes, okay? If you could get together in your small groups to discuss the question, how have I been non-denominational in my faith response? And just maybe take 5 minutes to just to share what you feel about it and what areas you think that you have been non-denominational and what areas you could maybe improve on. Um, okay, if we get back together, anybody like to share their thoughts of ideas of where you've been non-denominational? Anybody have any great insight? Yeah? Sure, sure. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Sure. Uh-huh. Yeah. Uh-huh. Just correct, yeah. Yeah, yeah. That's a sacred space. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Sure. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's part of their tradition. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, I spent 3 years in Mexico, and even in the poorest homes out in the mountain villages that have a little shrine there, a small sacred space. And one time, the pastor of the mission was Father Quinn, and really was a saint. But anyway, I went to a home one time, and there was a votive light in front of his picture. I gave him a hard time with that. So, that's right, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, sure, yeah. Yeah. We'd rather blend in than. Sure, sure. Yeah. But we can kind of bring it to the extreme too. Like if I go into a restaurant and I'm having a meal and I stand up and say, "In the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy," you know, I mean that's be way overdoing it altogether, you know. But just be yourself and live your life. But people, most of the time, okay, sanctity radiates from inside. You know, a lot of times you're in the presence of somebody, you know, they radiate holiness. They really do. I remember one time with Father Quinn. It was before I was assigned there. I went down to visit the mission, and there was a lady waiting for him in the courtyard. She was a single mom. She had 5 kids, and she had no food. And he gave her 5 kilos of beans, enough to feed her family for, 2 weeks. We got into the truck and we went out to the colony and went to visit this lady, an elderly lady. She was sleeping on a mattress on the floor, and she had no box springs. And he gave her $75 to buy second-hand box springs so that she could have a little comfort in her declining years. Then we went to another home, and there was a man was suffering from dementia, and I forget what she had. But anyway, they had no butane gas to cook a hot meal. So he gave her $50 to buy a tank of gas so they could have a hot meal. And I thought to myself, that's exactly what Jesus would have done, And and that was the life of Father Quinn. At any given day of the week, he could have $2,000 in his pocket. And he started off the morning, and it's just that same thing. He stopped by. They're building a church someplace, and stopped by there. And the guy needs 50 bags of cement, and takes out $500 and gives to him, and then he goes to the next place. And by the end of the day, all the money's gone. It's all gone for good purposes, But it's just he just radiated that inner sanctity that he had. Okay. Let's start with the second talk, or the next talk. And actually, I've been honest with you. This is the hardest talk for me to give. And the title of the talk is Barriers to Being Catholic. And we always begin with have a dedicated to a saint. And this time, it's St. Ignatius of Loyola. And St. Ignatius was a nominal Catholic in his early time, and he happened to be a soldier, and he got injured in the war, broke his leg, ended up in hospital. And when he did, he had time to reflect on his life, where he was going with it and what had happened and things like that. And he decided to take his faith seriously. And when he did, people in the church just dumped all kinds of questions on him, inquisitions and everything else. And he lived at a time when it was a time like our time, after a council, the Council of Trent. And at the time, there was lots of people in France and in Germany and Switzerland leaving the church. And Martin Luther and Calvin and all of these Protestant churches started to spring up. And Ignatius, when they started questioning him and giving him a very tough time, he could have made a decision. I can walk away from the church, because lots of people were walking away from the church because he was hurt. But he didn't do that. He decided to stay. To stay in spite of the hurt that we had caused him. He decided to stay. And what did he do for the church later? He started and founded the Jesuit order, very, very strong today. In fact, the Jesuits are the only religious order that take a fourth vow. All religions take poverty, chastity, and obedience. They're the three vows that they take, a standard for all religions. Some Jesuits, not all Jesuits, you have to be invited. They take a fourth vow, and the fourth vow is to do whatever the Pope asks them to do. That's their fourth vow. They will fulfill whatever the Pope asks of them to do. Take Pope Francis today. The poor man, he's the problem, because he took a vow to be obedient to himself. Yeah, there's a little contradiction there, okay? He's a Jesuit, was always a Jesuit, and he took a vow to do whatever the Pope tells him to do. Well, if he's the Pope, how's he going to tell himself to do it? I'm just pointing out a little contradiction, really. Okay. Anyway, with Ignatius at our side, we asked Ignatius to be with us, to help us to recognize the fact that a lot of us have hearts that we carry, and these hearts were caused by the church. And help us to recognize that, to be honest, to take these hearts to lift them up to the Lord. To be honest with the hearts that we have, and ask the Lord to alleviate these hearts that we have, so that we can continue to be part of the church, to be part of the people of God, in spite of the hurts that they have caused us. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. The passage of Scripture for this comes from Matthew's Gospel, and it's the parable of the weeds. And he proposed to them another parable. The reign of God may be likened to a man who sowed good seed in his field. And while everyone was asleep, his enemy came and sowed weeds through the wheat, and then made off. When the crop began to mature and yield the grain, the weeds made their appearance as well. And the owner's slaves came to him and said, "Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where are the weeds coming from?" And he answered, "I see an enemy's hand in this." And his slave said to him, "Do you want us to go out and pull them up?" "No," he replied. Pull up the weeds, and you might take the wheat along with them. Let them grow together until harvest. And then at harvest time, I will order the harvesters, first collect the weeds and bundle them up to burn, and then gather the wheat into my barn. The Gospel of the Lord. Okay. As a church, we have to recognize that lots of hurts have taken place. And they're very real. They really are. I remember visiting a hospital one time, and I came across a man, and he'd been out of the church for 40 years. And he wanted to come back. I asked him why he left. And he said that he was in the church practicing for Holy Communion. And he was talking, and the priest came and slapped him across the face. Never went back to church. Now, the slap across the face didn't last 5-10 minutes, most. But the inner hurt that it caused him was still there 40 years later. And that's real. Now you can't say, well, none of us are perfect. That's just saying, well, I'm a sinner, you're a sinner, so what the hell? We can't excuse sin like that. We have to be real with each other. I have to recognize there are real hurts out there. And we said, in recent years, as our church, we've had a very hard time, really had. We've gone through this whole sex scandal, and not just in the United States, but all over the world, had the same problem facing them. And it's not just the Catholic Church, it was other churches too. But it's very real in the Catholic Church as well. It was. And we have to be honest about it. And you might know people who have been abused by a priest. And that's very real. It really is. These hurts are there. And as I say, you can't excuse sin. We can't do that. But what we've got to do is take these hurts, to recognize they're there. And it's in the gospel story when the man sowed good seed and the weeds began to grow. So what are we going to do? We can't just pull up the weeds, because if we do, we'll pull up some of the good seeds as well. Let both of them stay there until harvest time, and then we'll separate the weeds to be burned. We've got to do the same with the church. We've got to recognize that the church is not a perfect church, but it's the body of Christ. And we've got to recognize that we've got to do what we can do to alleviate and to overcome whatever the sins out there are. Now, as as a priest, I've had to deal with this. You know, I was when I went to came back from Canada Law School in '85, and when I did, there was one case in Lafayette of sexual abuse by a priest, and it hit the national news. And you know, I was horrified by what had happened. Really was. And I went to my bishop at the time and I said, Bishop Houck, we need to have a policy to deal with this. He said, go write it. Now, it wasn't my department. Now, I was in the tribunal. I just called that the repair department. If you had a broken marriage, you came to me. But I could see the need for having a written policy. In fact, we were one of the first dioceses in the country to have one. And we were one of the first dioceses in the country, too, to have a review board. That if a complaint came in about any kind of abuse, if it involved a minor, there was a committee that had no relationship with the church as such, that was an independent committee that would evaluate that allegation and see if there was substance in it. And if there was, report it to the bishop and made recommendations as to what to do. And it didn't matter if this abuse happened in 1940 and the report came in 1995, we would still deal with that. Even if the perpetrator was dead, we'd still examine it, we'd still offer help to the person who felt they were abused. Because that healing needed to take place there. It really did. And I had a heart attack in 2002. I mentioned that already. And the reason I had was because I was dealing with all of this stuff. It was, it was hard for me too, as a priest, to be dressed like this. Just walking down the street. I could see people looking at me. Are you one of those? You know. And I still wore my clerics. But it was hard. I remember one day, I was at St. Dominic's Hospital, and I was just going to get on an elevator, and there was a mother there with her 5-year-old kid. They got on the elevator. I hesitated to get on the elevator because there's a kid there and the mother. That was an overreaction on my part. I accept that. But the fact that it made me hesitate to do that, But just pointing out that these hurts are there, they're very, very real, and they have to be dealt with. And as a priest too, I've had, I was in the forefront of this, and actually the second case in this whole country, the whole United States, of dismissal from the clerical state by an administrative act. I prepared the papers for that. At the time, it was back in 1999, and for dismissal from the clerical, if you're going to dismissal from the clerical, let me try to explain that. What happens if a priest is committed sin of sexual abuse? He can be dismissed from the clerical. He can be thrown out of the church. The church is going to take action against him. He's not asking to be thrown out. The church is saying, I'm going to separate all contact with you because of what you have done. That's dismissal from the clerical state. Okay. In the law that was there at the time, that had to be done by 2 courts. But when you did it by 2 courts, you had to bring in the victims and you had to take your testimony. And I didn't want to do that because you're victimizing the person again. So I did the second case in the country where I'm asking the Pope to dispense his own law and to do this. But he's going to do it because he's the head honcho. Okay. I did a second. Now, it's standard stuff today that Pope Benedict XVI in 1908, or 2008, passed a new law. And most cases are done now by this administrative process, but you have to have set up a court too where the person has a right to defense and all this happy stuff. But it did take its toll on me. But these are real hurts. Real hurts. Pope John the 23rd. He was a great pope, and before he became pope, he was cardinal in Venice. And when he became cardinal, the bishop of Venice, he heard about a priest that was in his diocese that was an alcoholic. And he had been suspended, hadn't exercised ministry in 10 years. But John the 23rd heard about him, and he decided to go visit him. So he heads for the bars one night at 11 o'clock and all the junk joints on the waterfront. And eventually ran into this guy in some old bar. He went in, he sat down beside him, and he said to him, "Do you know who I am?" The guy looks at him, he said, "Yeah, I do, I know who you are. You're the new bishop here." He said, "Yeah, I am." He said, "I want you to do a favor for me." The guy looks at him, "Why the hell are you coming to me for a favor? All the people you have in your diocese, why are you coming to me?" He says, "Because you can do the favor for me." And he looked and he said, "What's the favor?" He said, "I want you to hear my confession." The guy looked at him and said, "I can't hear your confession." He said, "I don't have any faculties. I haven't exercised faculties in 10 years. John said, "I'm your bishop. I can give you faculties. I'm giving you faculties." He said, I can't hear your confession. Look at all these people around here. He says, "No problem. We go outside." So they go out on the veranda. John went to confession. When it was over, John kissed his hand, said, "Never forget you're a priest." The guy never drank after that. See, everybody before that, every bishop before that, he treated him as an alcoholic. The guy knew he was an alcoholic. He didn't have to be reminded of that. But John went deeper. John went into his soul. There he was a priest. Changed him. A lot of times it's not, the issue is not the issue. It's the person is more important than the issue. And that's what we have to get to sometimes. It's the person behind the issue, if that makes sense. That was the great power that John had. He got beyond the issue to the person. You see, a lot of times it's not a question of who's right and who's wrong. The person is more important than the issue. That's what we have to touch. Okay. So, the question See, this is the hardest talk for me to give. Where am I most bitter about being Catholic? Where am I most bitter about being Catholic? And if you take maybe walk into a small group and discuss that, and honestly, it could be that, the way you were treated by a nun, in the second grade, the way you got conflicting advice from different priests, the way that you felt priests were active superior to you. Because these hurts are real. They're there. So think about it. Where are you most bitter about being a Catholic? See, we have to get these hearts out. And you see, you have to love me for what I am. With all of my idiosyncrasies, with all of my faults, with all of my limitations, because I am what I am. And the same with the church, I think we've come a long way as a Catholic Church in the last 20 years in dealing with the sexual abuse. And I'd be the last person to say it'll never happen again. It can happen again. It can. And we need to have safeguards there if it does happen that would act immediately. And a lot of times this, something like sexual abuse, it doesn't manifest itself for 20, 30 years. That's when it comes out. So, where are you most bitter about being a Catholic? So, that's your question. And we'll give you maybe 10 minutes as a group, as a small group, and then we'll have our answers. Okay? Okay. Are we ready to come back again? Sorry. Anybody would like to share their insights or where they're most bitter about being Catholic? Sorry, go ahead.
Recently, my son told me about his experience with a priest.
Sure.
That happened currently
In
the last year.
Sure.
The priest in his parish retired and someone new came in. And he immediately closed their youth center. And took everything out of it, sold it, turned it into a daycare center because he said, and those were his words, the daycare center brought in money and the youth center didn't. And as a result, I see my son drawing back from the church.
Absolutely, yeah, no question. Yeah. And these are real hurts.
They're real hurts.
Absolutely.
It hurts to see that happen.
Sure.
Because when you're working hard to see that your children are going to be Catholic and you want them a place where they can gather with other Catholic youth.
Yeah.
It's
no, I agree with you.
It's
no.
not the funds.
Yeah. But stuff like that should be.
I know it,
No, but
maintaining a parish is not cheap.
Yeah, but
maintaining a school is not cheap.
Yeah, stuff like that should be reported to the bishop, so and let him do an intervention with the guy. And as I say, there's none of us perfect, and we do make mistakes, priests, and a lot of the hurts that I've come across as a priest have been caused by other priests. I mean, when I was working in the tribunal, somebody has got a divorce and they go to their pastor and they're all torn up over it. And they say, "Do you think I have a chance of getting an annulment?" And they say, "No, you haven't. They don't have a right to say that." I've had people call me up. They say, "My pastor tells me I don't have a case." I say, "You send it to me and I'll make the decision whether or not you have a case." And invariably, they have a case. And stuff like that should be corrected, But you can do it in a kind way too,
Yes.
It's...
Well, as someone else in the group said, priests don't get feedback telling them what they're doing
wrong. Yeah.
in the parish. What they see is people walking away from their church and they don't know why.
Yeah. And these are real hurts. They really are. Yeah. But and I say a lot of most of the hurts I've come across have been caused by priests. They have, and I'm a priest myself. And I say, this talk is always the hardest for me to give. And in a sense, I've been like, remember that character in the old movies, Elliot Ness? I've been like Elliot Ness, in the sense of, confronting priests and say, "Listen, brother, this is not the way to go." And sometimes they fire back at me, but that's okay too, I can take it. I can give it too. Yeah, I remember I served Mass in the Franciscan Church for 9 years, and I was very dedicated to it. But I remember this priest. And back then, Mass was in Latin, and there was 3 or 4 of us serving the Mass, and one of the kids who was with me started laughing during the Confiteor, and the priest, got mad. So when Mass was over, he tore into us, and he said to me, "You were laughing at me." I said, "No, I wasn't," and I wasn't. I would have fessed up and said, "Yes, I was," if I had. He slapped me across the face. The slap across the face only lasted 5 minutes, but the damage lasted a hell of a lot longer. Later on, he happened to be the rector of vocations, and he knew I wanted to be a priest. And he came to my house and asked me to join the Franciscans. I took great delight in telling him, "No way, Jose." And the reason was because of that. So I'm here today. God works in mysterious ways. Sometimes he writes straight with crooked lines. And the reason I'm here in Mississippi today is because I just tell her, "No way, Jose," to that priest who was. And I was really very close to the Franciscans. I was. And if I hadn't become, if that maybe didn't happen, I would have been a Franciscan. So God does, work in mysterious ways sometimes. So.
Guidelines for how you end up being like Pope John, or as when he was the bishop, and bringing about unity in that kind of any kind of that kind of division.
Now, John was a historian, and that was his great forte. History can teach us lots of lessons, and John could see that history was teaching him a lesson. That, when he became Pope, and decided to start Vatican Council II, a lot of the cardinals said, you're going the wrong direction. He went and he opened the window and he said, "We need some fresh air in here," But he'd learned from history that, that, the Council of Trent had a tremendous effect on the church. What it did was Trent really redefined everything again. Jesus Christ is true God and true man is defined by Trent. There are three persons, the Blessed Trinity is defined by Trent. It went through everything we believe in. And you needed, at the time, you needed clarification, but what it did was it froze everything, solid, kind of. And there was no room for growth as such in theology. And see, God is, we can't put limitations on God, because God is infinite. And so theology is a kind of, we're viewing God from this lens here, but as we need to keep up with where God is, if that makes sense. So we need to expand our vision all of the time. And that's what mystery is. Mystery is that, not that we don't know anything about it, but it's so much greater and bigger than we are, that we need to keep an open mind as to where we're going in our relationship with God. So He's the God of surprises.
Well, but it's more than it's relationship with each other.
That's true. Yes. No. Yeah. And that's what we're kind of concentrating on these few days, is our relationship with each other as the Catholic people, and what that should mean. You know, that we're called into being a special relationship with each other, not denying other relationships.
We're all called to live with sinners.
Yes. Well, yeah. This is.
We're part of it.
We are, but the thing is that there's a kind of fraternal correction, if that makes sense, where we can correct each other, and we can do it in a nice way. We don't have to be mean about it, but we can do it. Now, I've been in situations in my life that I don't know why I get into them, but I get into them. But anyway, okay, here's an example. When I came back from Mexico, the bishop asked me to work with the migrants in the northeast corner of the state. And I did that for 7 years. Anyway, I visited 10 homes one afternoon. And the 10 homes thanked me for the letter that I sent in English. I said, I didn't send you a letter. They were confused. And so I translated the letter for them from English to Spanish. It was written in English. So I decided, well, we don't need to be confusing these people. So I went to the guy that wrote the letter, and it happened to be, he was in charge of Bolivar County evangelization. So on the stationery it had the address and everything. So next day I was dressed as a priest. I saw the address and I went by to visit. And with the best of intentions, say, I'd be happy to translate any letter that you want to send to these people. And I knocked at the door, and he said, come in. And I opened the door to go in. And when he saw that I was a priest, he jumped up from behind the desk, actually ran to the door, closed the door behind him, and kind of pushed me out. And that was sending a little message, you're no welcome here, kind of stuff. He said, what can I do for you? And I said, well, I believe you had occasion to send a letter. And I presented the letter. I said, now I am here to offer my services. I'll be happy to translate any letter for you. And he said, these foreigners don't need to be here. I'm a foreigner. I'm from Ireland. So he said, you don't need to be here. And my response back to that was, well, that's one of the reasons for our greatness here in the United States. We can live where we want to, when we want to. Okay, from there on it went downhill mighty fast. He started quoting scripture to me. I quoted it back to him in Latin. And then he said, "Excuse me," and he went in and he brought out, there was a guy that he had brought in from San Antonio, Texas, that was going to give this mission for him. Okay. And so I looked at the fellow and I said, "I'm happy that you're here." I spoke to him in Spanish only. I said, "Now, but what I'm asking you to do, don't come in here to this community and give a mission and then disappear and start counting heads. So 300 people receive Christ as their personal savior and you're out of here. If you come, stay and work with these people. Don't come and just give a mission and leave." And that's what I'm going to do. And Thursday I'm going to leave. But what I was trying to make a point was, it's important to stay with these people. It's important just, don't count numbers. Don't count numbers. But, lift them up and try to give them something to live for. So, that's the third language I had spoken with this minister there. Then I started speaking to him in Gaelic, and that he had him really confused by then. But see, he was talking down to me, and I wasn't going to take that. So I proved to him, not alone do I have as much education as you have, I probably 3 times more education than you have. And then I told him that what you're doing is proselytization. I'm not in the habit, if I'm having a revival, of sending a letter to all of the first members of the First Baptist Church to come to my church for the revival. That's not done in this day and age of ecumenism. That's proselytization, and that's what you're doing. I respect you as a minister, but I demand that you respect me as a minister. So, and sometimes there's fraternal correction, but you can do it in a nice way, but you have to stand up for truth and justice sometimes. There was another situation where, a lot of these migrants, if they went to welfare department and they were trying to get food stamps or something, they were really mistreated. And when I'd hear about that, I'd say, "You come with me." I'd go back to the same place, I'd be with them, and they were treated very differently. And there was another day, there was this young girl, she was 14, and she was working in a grocery store, and she was getting 50 cents an hour. The family owed $330 in grocery bill, and they could never really pay it because they were eating all the time, so that the bill just said, yeah. But this guy, the grocer, had a hold on the family. So the girl was working for 50 cents an hour, and working 12 and 14 hours a day, and allegedly to pay off this but had made no progress with it. So I sat down and talked to him, and I said, "Okay, I'll make a deal with you. I'll give you $300 cash, and that'll bring down their bill to $30. That's manageable for them. But in return, you have to pay her the basic minimum wage." He said, "I can't afford that." I said, "Well, she's working 14 hours a day. You cut it back. She only works 2 hours a day, and you pay her the minimum wage." So he agreed. I left, and 2 weeks I went by, visited the home again, and found out she had been fired. That got my attention. So I went back to the guy and I said, "Brother, we had an agreement. You broke it. Now, as far as I'm concerned, these are the options you have. You can stay in that position, and if you do, I'm going to sue you. And I'm going to sue you for for back pay for 2 years that this girl has worked. And I will win, because I'm going to go to a federal court, not the civil court, because you broke federal law. And I have the whole Catholic Church behind me. So you take your pick. What's it going to be? You rehire her, but you pay her minimum wage, and she only works the 2 hours or 3 hours a day. So he rehired her. Otherwise, he was going to face, I was going to bring him, and he knew I was serious. I was going to bring, and I tell him, you can check with your attorney, but I will win, because that's federal law. If they find you not paying the basic minimum wage, you can be fined. So sometimes you have to stand up for the truth, you know. And, you know, it's not easy, but I mean, look at the Lord too. What he did with the scribes and Pharisees, you know, when the way they were treating people, he confronted them. But he always did it in a nice way. You know, he said, you have subverted the law of God. That's not what the Father is asking of you, you know. And he pointed out their mistakes, that they got mad and eventually killed him, you know. But he still did it. So sometimes it's just standing up for the truth. It's hard, but you know, and that's why I say, you know, if a priest is not acting the way he should be, or so, it needs to be reported to the bishop and let the bishop intervene in it. So that's why I was like a late nest, and they'd see me come and they'd head for cover. So, in fact, I've been involved in seven cases of dismissal from the clerical state. And not all from our diocese. I've been involved with other dioceses. No, they're not all from. And then I have 7 cases too of what they call laicization, where the priest is asking, I don't want to be priest any longer. I want to get married, or whatever his reason is. And he said, I want out of here. And I've been involved in 7 of those cases too. So that's the repair department of the Catholic Church. So, okay. Any? Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Kind of related to the question that you asked before, and you're talking about truth, and that's one thing that I feel that the Catholic Church has to offer all of us.
Yeah, we do. We have the whole deposit of faith, but in saying that, you know, it's not right for us to say, well, I got it made, and you're second-class citizen. No, see.
No, certainly not. And that's not the point that I was going to make.
No. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Bear with me.
Sure.
So the point that I was going to make is these are very hard times, hardest times that have ever existed. But morally, these are very hard times that we're living in, and there are lots and lots of questions for which there are lots of wrong answers.
Yeah.
That come at us. And one of the things that I have struggled with in regard to feeling a bit of frustration, I won't call it bitterness, but frustration with the Catholic Church, is that my husband came from a Protestant background.
Sure.
And he was used to receiving really good catechesis from, they don't call it a homily, but from the pulpit,
Yeah.
the person who was the
Sure.
person of leadership.
Sure.
Getting that. And we go to Mass all over
Sure.
the place and experience lots and lots of priests, but the homilies that we receive are nice,
Yeah.
and they don't have anything in them that's not true.
Yeah.
But I've sat in the pew so many times and wanted
More.
that person. I've got teenagers.
Sure.
I need to really hear how you deal with what is going on in the
Sure.
world that we're actually living in.
Yeah.
And we don't have Catholics who don't know. There are Catholics everywhere who don't know their faith.
That is true. I don't know question. Yeah.
Catholics
Yeah.
But, you know, it should be legal.
Sure.
And there are just lots of things that
Yeah.
I run into. And we need that person who does have the authority and the education and the knowledge of the faith to impart that to us. We don't get it. And I'm sorry.
No, I mean, that's fine. But let me tell you, okay, for the Sunday homily, we're supposed to preach on the scriptures, okay? And that kind of puts a limitation on you. When the last parish I was at is St. Francis of Assisi in Madison. And I recognize that, you know, I'm kind of limited in what I can do for 10 minutes on any given Sunday morning as such. But I have available at St. Francis, or I had available, and it's still going on today, different groupings of adults. You know, we have with the Chosen as one of the what-you-call-ems that goes on every Sunday morning. We've got different groupings for different what-you-call-ems. You know, I've done presentations on different topics within the church. I call them timely topics as well. And because people need to be fed, they need to have, they get now, and they have a hunger for it. They really do. They have a hunger for it. So, but giving them choices of, there's about 4 or 5 different groups that meet every Sunday morning at St. Francis, right after the 8 o'clock Mass. And then we have Sunday school going on at the same time. So a lot of them are parents, because their kids are in Sunday school, they go to one of these, you know, groupings that are going on simultaneously.
And
But
did that come up from grassroots, like the people?
well, some of it is okay.
Or did you set that?
No, but okay. Each parish has its own personality. It does. It's different. Okay. At St. Francis, I advertised it as the parish of eternal life. We only had 10 funerals a year. And the neighboring parish, St. Richard's, had 35 funerals. St. Paul's in Vicksburg, which is a downtown parish, half the size of St. Francis, had 50 funerals a year. Okay, but it's the configuration of the parish. St. Paul's in Vicksburg is a downtown, it's an elderly parish, and there's a Catholic cemetery with it. Okay, a lot of people that bought the cemetery plot 40 years ago, now they want to be buried there, so they come back to St. So that's why they have 50 funerals. Okay, my parish was a lot of young married couples. Okay, and that's why I only had 10 funerals, in spite of the fact that I have a huge nursing home in there too, St. Catherine's Village. And still, I just only would average 10 funerals. So I was advertising, the parish of eternal life, you come to me, you live forever. But, okay. But I could see a need for all of these to be fed, you know, and to have, so, and if you offer different programs for them, you know, then I just give this timely topic, and like for coming up to Our Lady Guadalupe, I'd have a full church, and I do a presentation on the explanation of the hieroglyphics within it, and I've done 3 on separate ones on Francis and his early youth, and he's as Bishop of Buenos Aires, and who he is as Pope, and stuff like that. The people have a hunger for. So I'm not saying God. I wouldn't have tried to say that it's the perfect parish. It's not. No. We've got with one poor lady there. She's a great character, but she had to be doing something during Mass, and so we had all these plants, and she's come to daily Mass too. She'd water them every blessed day. And she drowned them all. She did. Okay. The other things that she would do is that she cleaned the chalices after Mass. Okay. But she had this big knobber of a diamond ring. And the scars are still within the the inside of the chalice, you know. And actually, when she passed away recently, and you see, I'm not the pastor any longer, but anyway, I told the present pastor, I said, she's still with us, because look in here. She left her scars here within the chalice. But she was a great character. And then I had another fellow in the parish, and he's loved to give me aggravation. And his grandchildren call him Grumpy. And he loves being grumpy, he does. He just delights in it. So when I got to the parish, shortly after I got there, and his property borders the parish. You know, he lives right on the parish lot. So he asked me to build a pathway for him from his house across the lot to the church. And I said to him, well, he came up at a parish council meeting, and they were all in favor of it. But we so happened to have an attorney in the parish, and he said, we need to look at liability issues at this thing. What happens if he has a heart attack crossing So we need to have seats for him to sit on. And then the attorney said, well, having seats to sit in wouldn't really solve the problem. If he has a heart attack, we need defibrillators. So we had to add the defibrillators every 10 yards and the seats. So when we looked at the price tag, it went from $5,000 to $100,000 to put it all together. I said, but it's part of our future plan, and it'll be a reality in 50 years, but then it'll make no difference to you. Then he came to me another day and he said, we'd go on like this all the time. He came to me another day and he said, I'm going to put it in my will that when I die, I'm going to be buried over in Meridian, because the former pastor had gone over there. And he said, I'm going to put it in my will. And I said, I always give you good advice, but you never listen to me, but I'll give you the advice anyway. I said, it's just going to be a rotten luck. You're going to die in the middle of the summertime, and Father Cosgrove is going to be in Ireland. They're going to have to put you on ice for a whole month. And then I said, there's another wrinkle you need to consider. He said, what's that? I said, the undertaker's going to charge you $10 a mile to ship the body from here over to Meridian, and $10 a mile to ship it back. That's $2,000 you've added to the price tag before you do anything. I said, that's going to come out of your estate. I said, but I have a simple solution to your dilemma. He said, what's that? I said, we could cremate you here, send you over parcel post, it only costs us $5. But we go on with this all the time. You know. And another day he said to me, he said, your light was on all night last night up at his house is across the road from mine. And I said to him, I'm just fulfilling the scriptures. He said, what do you mean? Let your light shine before others so you can see your good deeds. So I was just fulfilling what the gospel tells me to do. We go on like this all the time. So I think, you know, sometimes we can do it in a nice way, but we can get our point across too, you know, so anyway. But as I say, I'll admit that these barriers to being Catholic is always the hardest for me to deal with. But it is a reality, we have to deal with it too, so.